Well, it's another very warm welcome back, all my classic dirt bike loving YouTubers, and more importantly, welcome back to all my loyal subscribers who have signed up to support my channel here at Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, I still hope you're enjoying all my current content, and my videos are doing something to keep up your interest in these old classic dirt bikes. Now, in this featured clip, I've unearthed more classics captured in the racing paddocks during our last racing season in 2019, so sit back and enjoy the last and final episode of the best from In The Paddock 2019. Now, first up, this featured bike is Robert Kennedy's 1965 250 Cotton Star Maker. Now, this is quite a rare old British classic, and you'd be quite hard pressed to find another one like this still being used as an old vintage motocrosser, although there are a few restored examples to be found in private collections and other motorcycle museums. Now, these Villiers two-stroke motors were extremely popular back in the day, and not only were these used in motocross frames, but were also used in road racing bikes. Now, these Star Maker engines were designed by Bernard Hooper and John Favell, who were both engineers for Villiers at the time. Now, Bernard Hooper was reputedly the two-stroke motor specialist, and John Favell was the brains behind building and designing the gearboxes. Now, naturally, these were a two-stroke 250 motor with a 4-speed close ratio gearbox, although there was an option to have a 6-speed gearbox in this motor, although as you'd expect, these were mainly just used for the road racing riders. Now, an alloy fuel tank, as you would expect on a 1965 British classic, and even more surprising is that this one still has its original paint on it from that year, which is very unusual. But Robert's bike is a nearly original example of one of these Star Makers, and despite the seat and a change of exhaust tailpipe, this might be as near as you're going to get for a 65 Cotton Racer. But of course, the chassis and much of the other bolt-on parts are naturally supplied by Cotton motorcycles, although strangely later in their years, Villiers then withdrew supplying engines to Cotton, which left them in a very awkward position whereby they then had to shop around for a brand new engine supplier, and later Cotton motorcycles would use a Minarelli motor on their future machines. But although our featured bike may not be much to look at, but it's still a very quick and light little motorcycle, and has secured Robert a championship win on this bike in the pre-1968 class in 2019. And also during 2019, this little Star Maker motor was very reliable in terms of any mechanical issues. A replacement tailpipe, of course, which is not really surprising when you consider this little bike's age. But nevertheless, it's still excellent to see that one of these older classics, like this Cotton Star Maker, is still being used on the track and being competitive as well, because if a bike at this age is continuing to bring you championship wins, then it's pretty obvious that it still has what it takes on the track. Okay, our next old classic is Fraser Dykes' nice British made Cheney BSA. Now, Eric Cheney was possibly one of the last great motorcycle frame builders in the UK during the 1950s and 1960s, and although he did some racing himself in his early years and was very successful, he eventually quit racing in 1961 to concentrate on building and repairing bikes rather than racing them. But Eric Cheney was from the old school of motorcycle design, and he was forever scrolling his frame designs in chalk on his workshop wall and then rubbing them out and starting again. And he would do this several times until he thought it was just right before he would then commit any designs to metal. And Eric Cheney always used to say, "I instinctively know when a frame design is just right, and it just screams at me when it's wrong." Although this is still a very nice example of one of Eric Cheney's bikes, which looks like it's fitted with a BSA B40 motor in this particular case. But this bike is certainly a quintessential British built classic with the Eric Cheney frame, the BSA engine and the alloy tank, and of course the period correct alloy mudguards. But these bikes are extremely popular with the pre-1965 classic racers and quite rare, and of course not to mention quite expensive, because when you own an Eric Cheney race bike, it's not just another old classic motorcycle, but is actually a part of British history, and you can command big bucks if you're selling an authentic example. Okay, moving on, it's the turn of another rare Japanese classic this time, and this is Stephen McNally's 1975 KX 400 Kawasaki. Now, Stephen's KX 400 is yet another of those long lost classics that you very seldom see at vintage motocross racing events, and this particular 1975 bike of Stephen's is a very rare motorcycle indeed. But back in the day, these 400 KXs were very good bikes for 1975, with its close ratio 5-speed gearbox and normally aspirated piston port motor, fed of course by a big Mikuni carburetor. Now, I know personally that Stephen has owned and raced this bike for many years with the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club, and when this bike's going well, there are not many machines that can catch it on the track. Now, the bike's not a fully original KX, you understand, as it has replacement mudguards and a pair of new rear shocks, but it's still great to see these still being used competitively rather than seeing one in some classic dirt bike collection gathering dust in the corner of someone's workshop. Now, you can see here that Stephen's expansion chamber has seen plenty action on the track, with evidence of a few welding repairs to keep things all held together. Now, these were quite small drum brakes for a 400 dirt bike, and they were not great, but of course this was the 1970s and these were the brake technology of its time. Now, Stephen's 400 still has many of its original parts from 75, although as you would expect, the rear shocks have been swapped for what looks like a pair of classic Falcon units. Now, as I recall, I think these KX 400s had a bore of about 82mm and a stroke of about 76mm, and at the time put out about 42 horsepower, fueled by a 36mm Mikuni carburetor. Now, once again, not the original wheels on this bike, as the current trend for having black wheels on your race bike continues with these SM Pro Platinum rims. Although I'm not sure how Stephen's managed to keep the original exhaust on this bike, because he's done enough welding on it, that's for sure. But overall, it's still a very nice looking race bike, and as I said, not a hugely popular machine with classic racers, although Stephen appears to like his KX 400 as he's used it for many years at these Scottish classic race events. But it's great that Stephen still uses the bike on the track, and I've personally seen this KX400 strut its stuff, and with Stephen in the pilot seat, this particular Kawasaki is certainly a very quick machine. Okay, next up we have another nice British classic machine, and this is Chris Chell's lovely looking Shanee BSA. And once again, another of those fantastic Eric Cheney frames with a BSA B50 motor slotted into the chassis. Now, Chris is one of the top riders competing in the AMCA British Classic Motocross Championship, and this particular bike is a trick bit of kit and very quick on the racetrack with Chris in the saddle. Now, the British Championship is a very popular motocross series with vintage racers who normally compete over a 6-round championship at venues all across the south of England. And this year is the 25th anniversary of the event, so hopefully they will get some race meetings in before the end of the season. But this is still a very nice machine. This BSA of Chris is decked out in this nice blue livery, but this is certainly no show bike, although it does have that look and could easily qualify. But this is a true purpose-built classic racer, and if you've watched any of my other racing videos from this Cumberland Grand National in 2019, you will have already seen Chris and his BSA Victor put through its paces on the racetrack. So if you've not already had a look at these videos, then please try and take a minute to check them out. So that's just a very brief look at Chris Chell's lovely classic BSA race bike. Now, next up, it's the turn of Bill Porteous's 1981 Yamaha 465 Evolution bike. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you how good these 465 Yamahas were back in the day, and even in this modern time these are still very collectible and sought after race bikes for your Evolution class racers. Now, these were only produced for 2 years by Yamaha, and it was their superb handling, the supple suspension and that excellent two-stroke Yamaha motor that riders just fell in love with, and lifted this bike to almost iconic status in the off-road world. Although, mind you, when Yamaha launched this bike to the motocross public, they'd certainly hit the sweet spot when it came to sales of these 465s. Now, the previous 1980 465 engine hadn't the greatest low-end grunt in that year, and so Yamaha did some tinkering with the power to improve the low end and tame down the whole shot ripping horsepower top end that made the 1980 machine a bit of an animal. But at just 43 horsepower, this 465 motor fell a bit behind the legendary 490 Maiko and the mighty 495 KTM, which were already pushing out close to 50 horsepower at the time. And of course, sometime later, manufacturers would then up the ante to make bigger 500cc motorcycles, which made these already quick bikes even quicker and subsequently scarier to ride, which only the very brave would think of throwing their leg over. Although, as you're no doubt aware, possibly the most famous 465 Yamaha of them all was the bike that was ridden by Marty Motes at the 1980 500 US Grand Prix, when he competed on a virtually stock 465 and absolutely decimated the entire field. And this is still regarded as one of the biggest upsets in motocross history to this day. Now, in this shot we can see Yamaha's huge remote rear shock oil reservoir, which was named the decarbon shock after its French inventor Christian Boursier de Carbon. Now you can see here that Bill has fitted slightly different race bars to the originals, although many riders do perform this kind of upgrade just to help suit the rider's own particular riding style and of course his stature. And these 465 had of course Yamaha's monocross rear suspension system, which was excellent for its time and was very popular with riders who raced these bikes. But this is a very nice example, this 465 of Bill Porteous's, and of course one of the most iconic evolution bikes in the early 1980s. Now our next featured machine is Andrew Alston's Honda XL 350, which is another very rare off-roader and certainly not a bike that you see every day, especially at a vintage motocross meeting. But this example of Andrew's Honda is a very nice looking bike, and these few video clips were captured at a Scottish classic race event at Thornhill near Dumfries in July. Now it's not a bike that I know too much about, and Andrew wasn't around when I grabbed these few video clips of the bike, but I had seen this bike at various other classic race events in the past, and it was always an interesting talking point when spectators were wandering by. So I'll have to really apologise for not being able to supply further information about the particulars of the bike, as I said, I was unable to gain any details about the frame and the Honda motor, but I'm not wanting to go ahead and guess of which parts are specific to the bike in case of inaccuracies in my description, but I think it's more important that we just enjoy having a look around the machine. But I suppose it's pretty fair to say that this is a single cylinder Honda XL 350 motor, and I'm sure that these engines were fitted into road and trail bikes around the late 1970s, but as I said earlier, don't quote me on that particular fact. But Andrew's little Honda machine still appears to have all the correct parts fitted on it, including these drum brakes and the what looks like the original front forks. But it's still a very clean and very nice looking old vintage race bike, and certainly something that you don't see every day at these classic and vintage race meetings. Now the exhaust system to me looks like it's one of those American made super trap exhaust systems which are very popular on these 4-stroke Japanese bikes. But you have to say that this bike of Andrew's is still a nice looking bit of kit, and I can see how it would make a decent weekend scrambler with that very capable Honda 4-banger engine and what looks like a very light chassis. Although without a doubt a nice classic racer and truly worthy of a short viewing here on my video channel. Okay, our last and final bike to feature in this current series of the best from the paddock of 2019 is Trevor Calderwood's lovely Monda 500. Now, as you're no doubt aware, this is another of those tastefully put together hybrid motorcycles, and in this particular case Trevor has taken a 1981 490 microframe and applied some re-engineering to the German chassis to enable him to slot in this superb 500cc Honda 2-stroke motor. Now, if you're a regular visitor to my channel, you may have already seen a few of Trevor's other CZ race bikes, and Trevor has accrued quite a nice collection of machines throughout the years, and this new Monda was the latest addition to his pack of racing classics. Now, this kind of modification is becoming very popular with the twin shock racers, taking the well-proven geometry of the 81 Michael chassis and then performing a few minor alterations to make it accept this big brute of a 500 two-stroke Honda motor. But my own personal view as to why these hybrid combinations take place is, well, we all know that the 81 490 Michael chassis is possibly the best twin shock racing motocross chassis ever built, and if you take the geometry of the 81 Michael chassis and then slot in this massive arm-wrenching brute of a 500 two-stroke Honda motor, then you have a very lethal combination and a very fast race bike for twin shock racing. But make no mistake whatsoever, this is a very quick bike with Trevor on board, and powered by that very potent 500 Honda two-stroke motor and the agile Michael frame. This is without doubt a race-winning machine. Now we can see here that Trevor has kept the original Michael front suspension on the bike, although this rear swing arm is certainly not a Michael part, and I know absolutely nothing about its manufacture other than it's made from alloy and is extremely tough. But although this is a hybrid machine built from two different motorcycles, it's still well engineered and hasn't just been thrown together in somebody's garden shed or workshop. This is an extremely quick motorcycle, and certainly something that any of us would be proud to add to our own bike collections. And so there you have it, the last and final video from the best of In The Paddock for 2019. Now hopefully in the coming weeks I'll soon be able to travel and bring you brand new classic dirt bike material from my channel. So until next time, continue to be safe until we speak once more here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. This video was brought to you in association with WorldSport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more information.